Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of No Limits. No, I'm not talking Michael Buffer style. But, you know, if I want to go ahead and try to act like him, why not? I get to do it once a week that way anyhow. And I'm pleased to be joined tonight by Steve Balestrieri. And, of course, Candy Ebling is in the house as well. And, Steve, well, I know we're accustomed to doing football broadcasts, but why not take this one here and talk about your military background as well? I know that's a very passion. Welcome to the No Limits, Steve.
Hey, thanks for having me on again, as always. And I always enjoy talking football with you, and now we get to talk about some other stuff tonight.
Well, we really enjoy having you on, Steve. But yeah, this indeed tonight is a change of pace. And Candy, first of all, why don't you talk a little bit about your military banking experience?
I don't have a military background, but I did work for a credit union. It was the VA credit union in Milwaukee, Wisconsin for 15 years early on in my career. And we were actually located in the basement of the VA hospital. So I dealt with a lot of veterans, a lot of interesting stories. And it just really made me, I hate to say this, but made me more patriotic, but it made me more aware of my patriotism.
There you go, Steve. How about
That's
that?
it. I mean, you know, it's funny because, as I've been getting older, I've been spending more and more time at the VA hospital. As you know, things tend to get worse over time rather than better. And
Don't I know?
you know, you see so many interesting people there. I mean, and sometimes you're sitting there and you'll strike up a conversation with, you know, an older gentleman, and you hear their stories, and it's always amazing because you could go there every day and talk to 1,000 people, and you'd get a 1,000 different stories, and they're all really interesting. And that's what makes the military so intriguing, and that's what made it such a great life.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I got to tell you, my father served in the Army a while back over at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, I believe it is.
Uh-huh.
And then, of course, I had a very close friend who's like an uncle to me that served out in Arkansas. So, you know, and then I had another uncle, for that matter, Steve, that was in the Vietnam War. And when we talk about Vietnam War, Agent Orange, that was a pretty rough war that really, I don't know how you feel about it, was a war we didn't need to be in.
Well, you know, it was one of those things that happened at the time, and we just kind of kept getting deeper and deeper into it. And you know, I know a lot of Vietnam vets. I served with a lot of those guys were on the downside of their career when I came in the military. So, but I served with quite a few of them, and again, I mean, it probably wasn't a war we should have gotten involved with, and it was one that was easily we could have avoided it. But you know, hindsight being 2020, what it was. We ignored some of the warning signs early, and you know, so we got kind of sucked in a little piece at a time until we had over. I think at that peak we had over 600,000 guys over there at once.
Yeah, it was certainly a tough situation to be in. You know, and back then I was watching a lot of the developments about the Vietnam War. And I would watch the Today Show a lot. You could see these guys in the fields, and it was definitely, you know, they did a pretty good job bringing it to you, even though it's probably one that we, like you say, it's a part of history. You can't change history. With that said, Steve, let's talk about what you do. You write about current events and military affairs for SOFREP.com, and you say you're a special operations Forces report. Why don't you go into more detail on that, please?
Yeah, it's a website that's you know, manned by veterans, and we have guys from all different walks of life. We have guys that are, you know, actually living all over the world. We have guys that live in Europe. We have guys that live in the Middle East. You know, we have guys that live in the States, obviously. But you know, so we're bringing a level of experience and expertise that a lot of journalists might not have. We might not all be the polished of journalists, but you know, we do pretty well keeping up with current affairs, with military affairs, obviously. and with the politics that are involved with that, because that's what it comes down to. The politics are what drives, as you know, the train. I mean, we're involved in a lot of places and a lot of parts of the world, and we try to do our best to keep our readers abreast of what's going on in the world.
You say you've been doing this for 3.5 years, Steve?
Yeah, I started working for them about 3.5 years ago. Yeah.
And how did you get involved with doing this?
Well, it was funny. As you know, I cover football and I write about football. And one of my readers, an avid reader of mine that reads all my columns about the Patriots, because I cover the New England Patriots. Right. And, he said to me, he knew what my background was, and he was like, hey, have you ever heard of this website? And I was like, yeah, I've heard of it. I occasionally read some of the articles on there because they were very good. And, to keep up with what's going on. And he was like, well, they're looking for a guy to write about military stuff.
Really?
So he turned me on to him. I contacted the managing editor at that time. And, we spoke on the phone. And then they hired me on the spot. And it's been, 3.5 years now. And I've really enjoyed my time there because it's kind of it's kind of a really nice gig for someone who loves military history, because I'd say 99% of the time, let me write about whatever I want to. So there's certain things going on in the world that I've been very interested in, so I've been covering those. And I also write a lot about military history, a lot of the World War II stuff that's going on, that happened. A lot of Civil War history, which growing up, that was a big passion of mine because, it all happened right in the United States. So, when you're growing up here, you could go visit Civil War battlefields and see what was going on. And, it was something that really interested me when I was a youngster. It still does. And so that's like, it was a no-brainer for me to dive in right with those guys. And they've treated me very well. I write about 50 pieces a month for them.
Really?
As well as, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I do about almost 2 pieces a day for them. And most of them are fairly short, but,
right.
And I do about 5 or 6 podcasts a month for them.
Good for you. Wow. Well, I know one of the things we talked about, there's a war in Syria that's been going on since, 2011? And you talked about the Civil War, and you're telling me about 500,000 are dead. Obviously, that situation is indeed a mess, isn't it, Steve?
Oh, the Syrian Civil War is just, and it's getting worse, I think, rather than better, because there's so many different actors involved. I mean, you have the Syrian regime under President Assad, who's, they had a civil war start, about, I think it was about 2011, and when that started, they had resistance groups that were trying to overthrow him. That opened the door for ISIS to go into Syria and parts of Iraq, and they took over big chunks of each country. And as you well know, ISIS was was one of those organizations that I don't think you can find anything good to say about them. I mean, there's always some people that you can say, well, it's a matter of opinion. I don't think anyone has anything good to say about ISIS and what they've done, and we've all seen that. And so, you have the Syrians, the government that's supported by the Russians, and on one side, you have ISIS in the middle, you have the United States supporting some of the Kurdish, people that were trying to overthrow Assad, and then you have the Iranians who have jumped in and ostensibly to help the Syrians, but they're mainly there to help themselves because they want bases closer to Israel. And now the Turks have gotten involved because they don't like the Kurdish people that the United States is supporting, because they, in their country, they're considered terrorists. And you just have this volatile mix with with our guys right smack in the middle.
Yeah, I guess That's how you smell mess. So let's talk about some of the that's the way you broke that down. MESS, folks, and 48.56 point. It is a mess out there in the Middle East. All right, let's talk about the ongoing stuff in Africa. You say Sahel, south of the Sahara Desert, there's problems with al-qaeda. You talked about ISIS and terrorism.
And that's another area. When I was in the military, that was an area I didn't know a lot about, and it wasn't until after I was out I started getting really interested in what was going on in Africa. And the Sahel is this sub-Saharan, it's kind of semi-arid, it's almost desert-like, just south of the Sahara Desert. And it encompasses 5 different countries, Chad, Mauritania, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. And it's kind of Central Africa, and they've had a lot of problems with al-qaeda, with ISIS as well, and because of climate change, because of the poor population, and now because of the COVID, there's so many problems down there, and it's fueling this Islamic insurgency that's going on there. Mali was a former, that's where it all began, and again, it was about 2000, I'd say late 2012, early 2013. Mali was a former French colony, and it all started there, and it looked like the country was going under. The French sent about 4,500 troops in there in 2013 to help stem the tide and get the country stabilized. They've since upped it to like 5,100, and now they have a bunch of European countries involved. They're running a special task force to help train all these 5 different countries because they're fighting a uphill battle against this Islamic insurgency that's going on there, and there's hundreds of thousands of people have been killed. Millions have been displaced in Central Africa, and it's spreading to West Africa. So it's not something that's getting better, it's something that's getting worse. And it's also spreading more to East Africa because, as we all remember in Somalia, that they still have problems in Somalia. And there's a terrorist group called al-Shabaab, which is aligned with al-qaeda there. And, they've blown up hotels, they've blown up government buildings, and it's just a mess. Africa is a mess right now as well. And I think, all that stuff from the Middle East, it's just kind of spreading southward.
Now, you said the French is helping out big time with about 5,000 troops, but yet the United States is being low profile in that. Care to elaborate on that?
Yes, the United States has mainly stayed out of, what's going on in the Sahel now. Saying that, I mean, we had, some special forces troops that were killed in Niger a couple of years ago, and they were training the Nigerian forces down there. But for the most part, we've kept a much lower profile. Now, we have some bases in Africa, but what's going on there right now, we're mainly supplying air-to-air refueling for the French-led coalition's aircraft, and we're supplying some drones for intelligence gathering. But our troop levels down there are really low compared to what they are in different countries, especially in the Middle East.
No kidding. All right, let's talk about the podcast that you do for Self-Rep and interview people. I know that's something that you really enjoy doing.
Yeah, in Self-Rep, we interview all kinds of different people, and most of them obviously with military or political backgrounds. And again, they, for the most part, they'll send some people my way that they'll ask me to interview people that they met up with. But I also get to pick a lot of my own guests. So, a lot of stuff's in the news about China, recently, and how the Chinese are getting very belligerent and in the world, and they're trying to expand. Well, people are worried about war with China, so I figured, well, just recently I recorded a podcast with a former military attaché to China who, is kind of a resident expert on the Chinese military. And he opened a lot of eyes when it came to, how their military is constructed, what their training is like, what their day-to-day operations are like, and how they're trying to modernize. So, I did that. I've interviewed some people that were running for office, some former military officers who are, running for Congress, and others, some war heroes from the Vietnam War, from World War II. Those are always very, very interesting. And I think I spoke with you offline recently. I was researching the Israeli hostage rescue mission for back in 1976. An airliner got hijacked with a couple hundred people.
Right.
A lot of Israelis, and it ended up in Entebbe, Uganda. And the Israeli commandos launched a raid to free all the hostages. And it just so happens the current prime minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, it was his older brother that led the raid. So I was researching I wrote a real long, in-depth story for Safra about the raid in Entebbe. There's a third Netanyahu brother, Ido, who's also a commando in the unit. He's a doctor and he's a author himself. So I interviewed him for a couple of hours, and we got really in depth into the raid and how it all played out. And his older brother, who was an incredible soldier, and the amazing thing that the more I read about his brother, the more he really didn't want to be a soldier, and he, more than anything, he wanted to be a philosopher. But he was so good at what he did in the military for the Israelis that every time he wanted to get out, something else would happen, and he'd kind of be forced back into the mix. And he ended up becoming the only casualty on the raid in Entebbe. He was the only Israeli that was killed there.
No kidding. Have you ever talked about much military stuff in Washington, D.C. and come across a lot of politicians at all?
Oh, I've met quite a few because when I was a Green Beret, you're stationed overseas, and a lot of places where we were kind of considered at that time, they were considered vital to U.S. interests. So
right.
I've met a lot of different politicians in my time. I had a brief the vice president at one time. I had a brief I spent a whole day with the Secretary of Defense.
Really?
Yeah. Which was interesting, and he didn't have a very good sense of humor. But it was interesting. I mean, some of the politicians have a firm grasp on what's going on, and they ask a lot of really, really good questions, and they want to help what we're doing. But there was times when you'd meet some of them, and they have absolutely no clue of what's going on. And I always thought it was strange that these are the people that are voting in Congress on, whether or not these missions get approved or extended, and, where the money goes, and they don't have a clue of what's going on. And that was always kind of an eye-opener for me.
Was it? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
What vice president did you have a chance to brief?
Probably the least popular one in history, Mr. Quayle.
Oh, Dan Quayle.
Yeah. I was stationed at one of the embassies in South America, and President Bush sent Quayle and his wife on I'd say like a 4 or 5 day tour of all the embassies in Latin America. And they made a lot of stops, and we were the last stop, actually. And when they got to us, it was like 6:30 in the morning, and they were absolutely exhausted. And then the vice president, you could tell they were out on their feet. The vice president's wife came in, and they met with all the military guys, and they introduced us all, and we were briefing on what we were doing, and he was talking about the 8 packages to a different country, and we were all just quiet, and we were looking at each other, and then he's like, I'm talking about the last place we were just at. All right. And we all started laughing. Yes, you are, sir. And so Quayle laughed at himself, and he goes, right now, I'm so tired, I don't even know what country I'm in. So
that's funny.
So then the ambassador said, why don't you go back to the residence and get about 3 or 4 hours of sleep and come back, and we'll do this all over again. Yeah. Which they did, and he was on his game at that point, but he apologized to all of us afterwards, and he was laughing at himself, which I kind of liked him a little bit for that. I think guys who can laugh at themselves at times, because we've all been there.
Oh, yeah.
We've all been there. You get so tired, you don't know what day it is, and, So, I was never a big fan of Vice President Quayle, but, the fact that he was able to laugh at himself was pretty interesting.
Well, he was humble. Have you ever met the President of the United States?
No, I've never met the President. I was about 10 feet away from President Reagan at one point, and but that was as close, but I've never talked.
That's okay. No, just curious. So,
I met a couple of times. I've actually met Prime Minister Netanyahu when I was working in Israel.
Okay.
So I've got to talk with him a few times. And, he's an interesting dude. He's very down to earth, and he really likes Americans. So.
Well, the one thing I think that every American should have on their bucket list is you got to go to Arlington National Cemetery. I had a chance to go there when I was covering the Lions and the Washington Redskins. Have you ever made it to Arlington National Cemetery?
Oh, yeah. For a short period in my career, I was up in Washington, and I took part in some of the funerals up there. In fact, I was involved with the internment of the Vietnam unknown soldier that was placed in Arlington, and that's when I was 10 feet away from President Reagan.
Oh, is that right? Okay. Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, I did have a chance to visit President Reagan's library out in California, and I got to tell you, Steve, I love Ronald Reagan. I really do. Anybody that can fall asleep over at a parliamentary meeting is okay with me, because he probably figured they were boring anyway.
Yeah, I think Reagan was very popular with the troops. And, but getting back to what you were talking about, Arlington, it is an awesome place. And, of course, I had to go visit JFK's grave, because the Eternal Flame, Audie Murphy, who was, the most decorated soldier in World War II, he's buried there. There's so many famous, military heroes that are buried there. You walk through there, and it's kind of a who's who in our history, and it's pretty magical. And I don't know if you're aware of this. It all began because of General Lee, who was the commander of the Confederate troops during the Civil War. That Arlington Cemetery was actually his mansion.
No kidding. Wow, that's interesting.
The Lee Mansion is like right in the corner of the cemetery, kind of where the tomb. It's not far from right there, Tomb of the Unknown Soldier.
Right.
And they because the United States offered command of all the Union armies to General Lee, but he turned it down because he was from Virginia, and Virginia went with the Confederacy. So, as a kind of to get back at him, all the Union soldiers, when they were first getting killed in the Civil War, they buried them right out front of Lee's home at the Lee Mansion. And that's how Arlington Cemetery got started.
There you go, folks, on Arlington Cemetery. I'll tell you one, I went to quite a few of them. I think, if I remember right, is Joe Louis buried in there?
Joe Louis is buried there.
Yeah, I visited him. But another one that I really take a lot of pride in, and I think if anybody can relate to who I'm about to talk about now, Steve, is Frank Reynolds, the former ABC News anchor. I love.
He's buried there? I didn't know.
I'm pretty sure. You might want to go ahead and double check it. I'm almost sure that Frank Reynolds is.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm gonna check it out. But Frank Reynolds, I loved everything about Frank. I'll never forget. In fact, I'm gonna go ahead and Google that up right now just to make sure. And if I'm wrong, it won't be the first time. It won't be the last. But no, if my memory serves me correctly, I believe that Frank Reynolds was there, and that Ronald Reagan had a lot to do with that.
Yep, he's buried in Arlington National. You are absolutely correct.
Am I right? Really?
Yep. I'm sitting here looking at a picture of his gravestone.
Really? How about that? Hey, I love Frank Reynolds, is all I can tell you. I remember during the attempted assassination of Reagan that Frank Reynolds blew a gasket on the air and said, "Listen, I don't care about getting it first. I care about getting it right." And I'm like you. I'm one of those kinds of people that, to me, being a journalist like we are, we want to get it right. You don't have to be first.
Absolutely. I mean, that's this whole thing about being first now is ruining journalism, I think, because it's like, everyone's in such a rush to get it before everyone else that a lot of times they might have part of the story, but the majority of it is wrong.
Oh, yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, I didn't realize Frank Reynolds was born there, and as I'm looking at it, I didn't realize he served in World War II.
How about that? Well, look at that. Now, I gave you a little bit of history lesson there, Mr. Steve.
Yeah, I met Peter Jennings when
he
used to work for ABC. He came down to Bolivia when I was down there, and I spoke with him. He was he was pretty funny.
Oh, yeah.
I thought he had a great sense of humor, and he was pretty down to earth because he kept asking me and another guy if he could interview us on the air, and we were like, "Nope, you can't." And he's like, "Why not? I want to know what you guys are doing here." And we said, "Because if you're interviewing us, by the time you air this, we'll be ex-Special Forces, because our unit will throw us right out for talking with you guys." So, and the Mill Group commander down there at the time, he was like, "No, what they're doing down here is kind of classified, and we want to keep it that way." So,
one of my...
He was pretty cool. I met also a guy I didn't like was Mike Wallace from 60 Minutes.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't care for him.
One of my favorite people, Steve, that I've ever met was Congressman Jack Kemp, and I had an opportunity to write a story on him during the Super Bowl 39. Ironically, the Patriots ended up beating the Eagles. I covered that game, and it was great over at, they call it, I don't remember what Jacksonville Stadium was called. I'll just say Jacksonville Municipal Stadium because it might have been back then. But Congressman Jack Kemp was great. Obviously, I think he was drafted. He could have played for the Lions, but went to Buffalo. And when I told him he was from Detroit, him and I went over to the Jacksonville Convention Center. We just found a spot where nobody was around us, and it was just unbelievable. So, yeah, I don't know. I'll go back to my comment on Frank Reynolds. To me, I thought he, defined everything that you could define with integrity as a journalist. And, what can I tell you? I'll always tell you until I'm blue in the face, I love Ronald Reagan. I don't like to get into extended politics, but Ronald Reagan to me is a guy that if I wish I had an opportunity to meet any president, he would have been definitely one that I would have, without a doubt. I marveled at him quite a bit. I really did, so.
Exactly, and he just had a way of speaking where you always felt like he was speaking to you, and that's what I always liked about him. But he was a no-nonsense kind of guy. I thought he was a great president. He was the guy we needed at the time. After the 60s and the 70s where American
we got pushed
were
around,
feeling so bad about ourselves and our country.
Right.
We needed a guy like Ronald Reagan to come in, and I thought he galvanized people and got us back on the right track.
But, I got a couple of his books at home, even though I haven't read them. But I'll tell you what, anybody that can go out there and send a worldwide message to the Iranians that I used to do Western movies and I don't mind shooting you, okay, and then the Iranians got scared to scared to death, and how quickly did that Iranian hostage crisis end? I thought it ended pretty quick, didn't it?
Yeah, it didn't take long for them to release the hostages when the results of the election were.
Yeah, how about Inauguration Day, the way you show up Jimmy Carter as you go ahead when Ronald Reagan's about ready to take over. Hey, we don't need you 52 anymore. We have to deal with Mr. Western here about to take the Oval Office. So,
yeah.
But, yeah, I don't know. For all you folks out there, you got to get to Arlington National Cemetery. It is definitely a must-see. But, yeah, well, I would love to go back and see Frank Reynolds, and I just marvel at the guy. I really do, and I'm glad.
Well, he was one of those kind of guys. Growing up, there was like Frank Reynolds and Walter Cronkite, and those guys. And the amazing thing is, you watch the news today, and you watch the news back then, and you couldn't tell. I couldn't tell you if Frank Reynolds or Walter Cronkite was a Democrat, a Republican, or if you want to call them conservative or liberal. I mean, you couldn't tell back then. They kept the politics out of it. They reported the news, and they reported it straight down the line. And that I kind of missed that. I mean, that was the journalists that we grew up. We would watch the news at night, the national news, when that would come on, and we were glued to the TV because they were telling you what was going on in the world, and they were giving it to you straight back then.
Well, yeah, they were objective. They had a straight-laced poker face. This is what's in front of us. Do what you want with it. And I don't know about you. I have a very tough time connecting with this day and age. I really do. I mean, obviously, Steve, we have no choice but to tolerate it. Doesn't mean we got to like it. But when I can see, a straight-laced, poker-faced type of broadcaster, then of course you're going to marvel at all the good things that you come out of them. Candy, what are your thoughts about some of the people that you had a chance to watch in terms of being straight-laced?
Well, you're a little bit older, so you would remember some different people, I guess, than me. Like I had the Tom Brokaw.
Okay.
Brokaw. We watched 60 Minutes a little bit back in the day. So yeah, you had the Walter Cronkite and some of those. But I mean, newscasters have changed so much over the years. I'd say, they don't, like you said, they have more of a political spin on things now, whereas before they had to be so, what's the word, not politically correct, because that you didn't have
unbiased.
Unbiased. That's a good,
right.
Good word. Thank you, Steve.
But yeah,
no, it's true. I mean, that's one of the things that, growing up, that was one of the things that we had. Again, I mean, I couldn't tell you what their political leanings were. I mean, you never saw that.
Right.
I mean, I remember Walter Cronkite being very upset when President Kennedy was shot. I was really, really young at the time, but I remember seeing the films afterwards. But I mean, so wasn't everyone else at the time, because it was a horrifying, situation that happened in Dallas and in '63, and it's just, I don't know, it's just one of those weird things. And I say that, but I think a lot of people will tell you my reporting is biased today. So I guess I'm as guilty of it as everybody. I tend to be more conservative. I try to keep the politics out of it, of the stuff I write today. But I'm sure that somebody will tell you I'm a right-wing conservative. I guess the way I write.
Well, I'm a right-handed conservative person when it comes to doing my business. I haven't learned how to write left-handed yet. But
well, it was funny because when I was a Green Beret in the Army, I used to run from the press. We avoided them like the plague. And, then after I was out of the military and, I went back to work for them for a while there as a contractor, and I still avoided the press. And then I got a job working for security for high, like bodyguard work and, personal security work for, dignitaries and rich folks and Hollywood people. I worked on a few Hollywood films. I worked as a security advisor when they film overseas.
Wow.
And then the press are everywhere because they're all over the film industry. And it was kind of like the opposite. And then some of my friends were like, "Oh, so you've gone over to the dark side, So,
right. No, I hear you. Well, you do your podcast and all that. Do you find yourself doing a lot of Zoom calls nowadays to get to some of the people? I mean, I really respect what you do and your work with the military, which is one thing I've wanted to bring out so that people got to know you beyond the pigskin and the gridiron.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we do a lot of background stuff before. Getting people on the podcast is usually not a quick thing, although, sometimes if we catch people at exactly the right time, they'll agree to come on right away, and then we can get it recorded. So that's kind of really neat. I don't know if you guys are aware of, there was a Army paratrooper lieutenant, his name was Clint Lawrence. Is Clint.
Right.
Lawrence. He was convicted of war crimes in Afghanistan, and he was given like a 23-year sentence, and then the president commuted his sentence. He was freed last year. I wrote a series of articles on him when the president was considering pardoning him because I thought, what his troops were facing, it wasn't a murder situation. He did exactly what he needed to do to protect his men, and I think he was justified in doing it. But he just wrote a book. It's coming out in September, but I got an advanced copy, and I will be doing a podcast with him coming up in the very near future, and I'm looking forward to that because he has a really intriguing story, and he was kind of hung out to dry because of politics. And I think it'll be worth listening to because a lot of people had him pegged as, this guy was an absolute murderer. And when you read the story and you read the reports that came out of there, I can't imagine as being a leader of people doing anything different because you're responsible for bringing all those boys home. And the guys that were killed were Taliban bomb makers. And they were one of the, I don't know if you're aware of this, but one of the ways the Taliban attack our guys is they parallel, if our guys are traveling on the road, they'll be traveling on motorcycles, paralleling them on a side road. So they saw this. They saw the Taliban guys speeding up. In other words, they were coming to an intersection. They were speeding up. So, they opened. The Afghan troops actually opened fire first, and then the Americans did, and they killed two of them.
Okay.
When they ran their IDs, they were, already they were Taliban bomb makers. They were already in the database. But because of politics and what was going on at the time, they say that he overstepped his bounds and, they accused him and he was convicted of murdering these two Afghans who the military said were civilians, and they weren't. They were Taliban. And he spent 6.5 years in federal prison in Leavenworth. And it's just, the more you read of the story, and, this is a guy that was failed by his own chain of command, his own leadership. And it's really sorry. And what if he didn't do what he did, and these guys exploded a bomb by one of his vehicles? Now, how are you going to explain that to the parents of American soldiers who were over there? We can't fire until we're fired upon. Sorry, that doesn't cut it. So,
right. Well, let's segue to that book over to the fact that you wrote a book on the military and the short stories are in it. Why don't you give us some information on that?
Some of the stuff I write about I like to write a lot of what I write about my own experiences are some of the ridiculous, hilarious, stupidity stuff that you would find in the military on a day-to-day basis, and believe me, there's plenty of it. Even in certain places that are pretty dangerous at times, you'll find stuff that will just crack you up. And, so I wrote a bunch of short stories about that. And my editor contacted me, and he was like, I love these short stories. They're hilarious. And you ought to think about writing a book. So I put together a book of all short stories about funny stuff that happened in the military. If you're looking for like a in-depth war story and blood and guts and all that, it's not going to be in there. This is stuff that was, again, as when you're a Green Beret, you're traveling all over the world, and you're pretty much isolated. And some of the stuff you come across is pretty hilarious, and you just. Because certain things happen and situations happen. And, one of the things I think that always cracks me up is kids are the same everywhere. And, I don't care whether you go to the Middle East, you go to South America, you go to Africa, kids are always the same. And kids never fail to crack me up wherever I go in there. And there's a couple of stories in there about some interactions with children and it's just, it will amaze you at the same time. It will crack you up. So, that was just finished going through the editorial process. It's all edited now, and I think it will be going to the printers pretty shortly.
Well, how about disclosing the name of the book?
We haven't actually come up with a title yet. My wife and I have been hashing out some titles. We haven't come up with one that we really like yet, and my bosses keep coming after me because they want a title for the book. Right. And I have some thoughts in mind, but I haven't actually come down with a hard title yet. But look for that, because I think, like I said, it's kind of like a humor in uniform type of thing. It's
right.
And there's probably about 60 or 70 short stories in there, and some of the stuff will definitely crack you up, because it's, I'll give you a quick, for instance.
Okay.
When I was down in Honduras in the mid-'80s, some friends of mine, and we were all Green Berets, and we got in a little trouble downtown, one night. Sometimes, as Americans, that can happen when you go to bars.
Right.
So they decided, we're going to restrict you to the base for the rest of the time you're here. And I was like, oh my God, I don't want to be stuck on it, because the bases in Honduras are pretty primitive. So they said, well, you can be stuck on the base for the rest of the time you're here, or the airfield, they had a airfield that the Hondurans had some old, like Korean War vintage jet aircraft. They need sandbags for the perimeter of the airfield. We need 1,000 of them. I said, I'll take the sandbags.
Really?
And they were looking at me and they were like, are you crazy? Because it's like 100-degree heat. I said, I'll get you 1,000 sandbags. So they gave me like a big truck. They put 1,000 sandbags in the back. They threw a shovel in there. They gave me a truck driver, and I said to the truck driver, go get me 5 more shovels. And he's like, for what? And I said, trust me. So we drove, and instead of going on the back side of the base, I had him go out the back gate, and we went down through the pineapple fields on the north coast there, and we ended up on the beach. There's a beach there where the road dead ends, and there's a bar right on the edge of the beach, and all the little kids who live in the area, they fish out right off the sand. It's one of the most beautiful beaches you'd ever see, and it's completely non-built up. I mean, the jungle comes right up to the sand, and but there's one little bar there. So all the kids fishing, I went out there and I the head kid is probably 13 years old. I gave him half of a $20 bill. I ripped it in half, which $20 down there, especially during that time, that was like, he was like a gazillionaire. And I was like, I'm going to give you the other half. You get me all these other kids and start filling sandbags for me. I'm going to go sit in the bar.
That's pretty good.
So I'm sitting in the bar and I'm nursing a hangover and I'm drinking a beer. And these kids are all, I showed the head kid how to, how full the sandbags have to be, make sure they fill them up. So the kids are all wanted something. Of course, they wanted something. So we had those horrible rations the Army issues, MREs, It's called Meals Ready to Eat. That's what MRE stands for. We used to call them Meals Rejected by Ethiopians.
That's pretty good stuff.
So I sent a truck driver back and I said, go, in my area there, I have like 5 cases of MREs. Bring them all back.
No.
So I broke them up, and next thing I know, I had like 50 kids filling sandbags. So the truck drivers keep making trips back to the air base with sandbag, and the guys at the base are like, "Oh my God, what is he doing? He's filling sandbags faster than we can throw them down."
Wow.
So at the end of the day, I had 1,000 sandbags, so I didn't fill one, and my hangover was gone. I had sat in the bar in the shade all afternoon underneath the palm tree outside, and drinking a beer, and these kids all filled it. They went home with MREs. They were, happy. This other kid got $20, so he was rich, and then I wasn't on restriction anymore. So it's called entrepreneurship.
Very interesting stuff. So, I can't get off the Frank Reynolds thing, so I'm not going to get off of it right away. I'm looking at his Wikipedia page. Hey, listen, I'm an old school journalist like you, Steve. So here's the quote from his Wikipedia page about the way journalism should be done. It says, "Let's get it nailed down, somebody. Let's find out. Let's get it straight so we can report this thing accurately." Oh, there's my energy there. My goodness.
Yeah, that's something you won't see anymore.
I know. By the way, we'll get the name of that book out of you as you continue to keep coming on this broadcast during the season. Once we get the name of the book, we'll make sure that you get it. We're going to get it out there no matter what. So, but hey, when I look at Frank Reynolds and I look at what we do and how much we really enjoy doing it, then he's the epitome of legendary professionals in my eyes. So let's go back to your Green Beret. You said you were 17 years Army Special Forces, and yet you were hurt and medically retired. Give me a summary about your 17 years in the armed forces.
Yeah, I started off, I started off as a Special Forces radio operator. Originally I was a heavy weapons specialist, but they had too many of those. So they always were critically short radio operators, so they taught me Morse code and antenna theory and all that, so I became a Special Forces radio operator, and that was my first job in Special Forces. I was assigned to the 7th Special Forces Group, and, our area of operations at that time was Latin America. So they sent me to language school to speak Spanish, and, we were working at that time. Honduras was really big. There was the Civil War in El Salvador. There was the Civil War in Guatemala, very bloody Civil War there. There was also, I was stationed in Panama. We had the war down there with Noriega back in the late 80s, 89, I think it was. And then there was the drug stuff going on in the Andean-rich countries of Bolivia, Colombia, and Peru. And, we worked extensively down there during all that time. It was a really interesting time. Later on, as I progressed through the ranks, I went to the Operations and Intelligence course and became the intelligence sergeant on a team. And then later on, I became a officer. So I spent the last 8 years of my career as an officer before I got hurt. I got hurt down in Latin America, and then they brought me back up to Walter Reed Hospital. They did surgery on me, but they couldn't really fix what was wrong. And that's when, at that time, they said, it's time for you to find a new career. But it was a great life. I mean, I traveled all over Latin America. I got to meet hundreds and hundreds of really good people because we would work with the militaries of the countries we were working in. And, we made some lasting friendships down there. There's still people that we contact today, even after all these years. And it was a great life. I mean, for a young guy, I mean, you travel all over the place. You get to work in exotic locales, and might not be a vacation spot, but and you're working in a real small team. We would, typically travel with 10 to 12-man teams, and we would be the only Americans in either that area of the country or in the country itself. And later on, when I became an officer, I worked on a couple of 2-man missions where they sent just 2 guys to a country. I was working down in Bolivia the second time I was there, which is one medical sergeant and myself, and we were training the Bolivian counter-narcotics strike forces that would go out and raid the drug labs and the airstrips where, the cocaine was getting brought out, and those guys would work closely with the DEA. And that was a really interesting time frame back then.
All right, so let me ask you this. I know you've been writing about the New England Patriots since 2011. Did that come about after you served in the military?
Yes. Yeah, because when I first got out, like I said, I was medically retired, and then when all the stuff kicked off after 9/11, they brought me back as a contractor, and I was working with, I had about 100 Iraqis working for me. Then I went to work, for the film industry. I was doing the security work for them. And then it was like later on, my family was tired of talking to me on Skype, So my wife asked me, do you think you could find a job close to home where you're home every night? So I said, well, I went to school for, journalism and stuff years and years ago, but I've never had a job though. So I applied for a local newspaper back home in my hometown, and I had no experience, but they saw my resume, so they brought me in just to shoot the breeze with me because they were like, well, we're not going to hire this guy, but let's just talk to him because he's done some interesting stuff. So after talking with me, they changed their mind, and they hired me as a local reporter, and then it was then that I met a couple of guys down at Patriots training camp, and they were telling me they write for this site. And, they were looking for a new writer. So I talked with the owner on the phone, and, we compared notes, and we talked for a couple of hours, and I started writing for them in 2011, and, haven't looked back since. And, that to me is like, it's not even really a job because you go down there, when I don't have media access all the time, but when I do get it, you get to go to practice, you go in the locker room, you talk to the players. I mean, that's not even a job. For somebody who loves football like I do, it's kind of like a dream come true.
Yeah, I've got to tell you, I've covered sports for the better part of 40 years, and when you have an opportunity to go out there and talk to not only the players, but the front office people, the coaches, managers, whatever, and, you're right. I mean, even though we know it is a job, you don't think about it, and not only that, you also think about the fact of how many people did you meet along the way in addition to what you've already done to begin with. Beyond that. So now that we're on the subject of football, there is no military broadcast that I think would be complete, since the military is your passion, and talking about Pat Tillman, who passed away when he gave up $1 million job to work for the, was it the Rangers? Is it the Army Rangers?
Yeah, he was Army Ranger, yeah.
Right. So what are your thoughts about Pat Tillman giving up a football career to go into the military? I mean, I'm inspired by Pat Tillman.
Yeah, and again, it was something that, he felt like we all owe our country a debt for living in such a free society. So when 9/11 kicked off, he felt strongly enough where he enlisted, and he signed up for the Ranger Battalion, which is really, that's a tough school, and it's a very tough unit. Those guys are at the tip of the spear all the time. Worked with them many times. I worked a lot with the 1st and 3rd Ranger Battalions. But again, I mean, he felt really strongly about that. An interesting thing, when he was home, his last leave before he was killed, he spoke with Bill Belichick. And
really?
Bill Belichick told him, he's like, when you decide to get out, whenever that may be, we have a job for you.
Really?
And because he was considering getting out, and after his hitch was up, and Belichick was going to bring him on as a player, but he told him, we have a job for you when you're done. And because he told him he admired what he did, and I just thought that was a really interesting anecdote about it, the whole thing, and it was so tragic how he died. But those type of things happen. Those friendly fire accidents, especially you're up in the mountains there, you're dealing with, a lot of different situations, and it was tragic how it happened. The Army tried to cover it up just because of how famous he was, and they didn't want to admit that. So, at first they wrote it up, then he was killed in a Taliban ambush. But, I understand where they were coming from on that. I mean, he was a famous person, and, they didn't want that kind of bad thing to get out, but then it snowballed and it got worse.
Okay, well, obviously you traveled a lot, so why don't you list some of the places that you worked in the military? I know you've talked about traveling, so let's throw it out there. Some of the favorite ones, the not so favorite, bring it out there, bring out the globe.
I think my favorite place to visit, I worked in 3 or 4 different times, was Israel. Because of the history, and you and I spoke offline. I told you
right
how passionate about history.
Right,
I just love history, and Israel is such a historic place. And while working there, I was working with a really wealthy family who was very religious, and they were, they had taken about 18 of their close friends on a long trip to visit everywhere in the Holy Land, and we walked, all the places where Jesus did his thing, and part of the Stations of the Cross, where Jesus carried the cross up to the top of the hill where they ended up crucifying him. Part of the road that the Romans had built 2,000 years ago are still there in Jerusalem. And those cobblestone roads that the Romans built are still there. And when you walk on that road as you're going up the hill, it gives you kind of goosebumps. Because even our guide, who was Jewish, our guide, who was one of the best in the country, he said, I don't care if you're atheist or you're Christian or you're a Jew or you're a Muslim or whatever. He's like, we all know that Jesus was a real person. And he walked the earth, and he walked this street, and he carried the cross up there. Now, whether you believe that, who he was or whatever, he still walked this street. And he's like, and you just need to picture that. And the way he was describing it, and then you're sitting there and you're standing on these same cobblestones. And it kind of gives you goosebumps. And that's what the whole country is like down there. I mean, some of the, the old... the ruins of Jerusalem, where the Romans knocked down the temple, and then out of Masada, where they had that big fortress against the Romans during the revolt. It's just an amazing place. So that was one of my favorites. I think Colombia was another favorite because it's such a beautiful country. Although when I was working down there, it was very dangerous. we used to have to go to work in an armor-plated vehicle because of the threat against Americans, but such a beautiful country, and I really love the people there. And then I worked in a lot of other places. I've been to Africa, Senegal, which I didn't really care for, although the coast was beautiful there. But it's, again, very historic. That's where the slave trade went. And we went to the slave museum where, when the slaves would be brought to there was a little island where the ships would come in. And that's a very moving place when you see that. And they have artwork all up there. But Senegal I didn't really care for because it was so poor and run down. Been to South Africa. I've been to Uganda. And then, of course, everywhere in Latin America. I really like Chile. Bolivia and Colombia, obviously, was there. Peru. But Panama was a great place to be stationed. For an American soldier there. We had a bunch of small bases there. And if you like the beach, you'll love Panama.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, I remember, I'm like you, I'm a big junkie for American history. I really am. I've been to the colonies, Jamestown, Yorktown, and Williamsburg is out there. Of course, everybody's got to go to Washington in their lifetime. Arlington, we talked about that. And Fort Bragg, I did visit that military base out in North Carolina, which is good. So, and I've done a lot of things. I've gone to different places around the country that were historical significance. And I've yet to travel overseas. I certainly like to do that. And Israel is certainly a bucket list. So I can appreciate everything you're saying because, to love history is to love history and know this is where we live and you want to absorb as much as you can. And there's certainly enough of it. I don't care what part of the country you're in.
One quick funny story.
Sure.
Growing up, I was always absolutely enthralled with the whole thing about the pyramids in Egypt.
Oh, yeah?
And, that was on my big-time bucket list. I wanted to see the pyramids of Egypt before I go. And the same family that I had traveled with to the Holy Land, I went with them to Egypt. So I was like a little kid. I'm sitting there, and now I'm supposed to be watching over them, but we were going to the pyramids, and they could tell I was really excited. They had been there a couple of times before, so they could tell that I was trying to focus on being, my job, but at the same time, they knew I was excited. So you see the pyramids, and you're looking at them, and behind them is the desert that seems to stretch forever. And the Sphinx is right in front of the big pyramid in Giza. And you see that, and it just blows you away. And then I turned around, and it blew it right out of the water. So what am I seeing? 50 yards away, Colonel Sanders.
Really? No kidding.
Kentucky Fried Chicken and Pizza Hut is right in front of the Sphinx, right across the street.
Well, an interesting irony is, just so you know, I did visit Colonel Sanders' gravesite out in Louisville, Kentucky, just so you know, on a recent trip and Muhammad Ali. We could get into all kinds of things about Muhammad Ali not wanting to go to Vietnam. We won't do it. Yeah. But I did, have a chance to see Ali's gravesite because he's buried in the same place that Colonel Sanders. So, and I traveled been to all 50 states and in key places in Canada as well as in Mexico. So, I guess I haven't done the overseas thing, and God only knows when we're going to do it now with COVID-19 in the near future. But, the pyramids, I've heard a lot of incredible things about there. Out in the United Kingdom, London area, I know there's a lot of history there. We date back to the Revolutionary War. And I can tell you many years ago at Broward Community College, I took a writing class where you wrote on American history. And you know what? That wasn't sports, Steve, okay? This is writing about American history. And I had an instructor there who said, "You're a writer. This isn't fair. I know you're going to do well in my class anyways." I said, "Well, I'll deal with it, man." 'cause I had a little bit of an upper edge because, again, I was writing for newspapers and these other people weren't. But what it did is it challenged me, like these broadcasts on No Limits and some of the other ones, to be able to get out of what we normally do, and I think that's really what I enjoy doing it. And by the way, I just wanted to let everybody know that you are listening to No Limits. We're talking to Steve Balestrieri. And this broadcast will also be heard at a later date on the South Florida Tribune podcast. So we want to make sure that Steve's stories definitely have an opportunity to reach different audiences as well. So how about that, Steve? 2 for the price of 1. All righty.
Hey, yeah, that's great. How can you ask for more?
Oh, I don't know. How can you ask for more? When you have a lot of good, interesting material, you just go with it and put it out there as often as you can. So with that said, Steve, let's go ahead. I'd like you to comment on the state of military affairs now as they stand.
Yeah, I mean, things right now, the military is going through a big change. I mean, we've been involved with these wars since 9/11, 2001. I mean, it's almost 20 years now. And, the amazing thing is that a lot of these guys and women who enlisted right after 9/11, they're almost at their retirement now. And, our country has been at war a very, very long time. And now, we're trying to wind this stuff down and get our guys out of there. And it's still a really dangerous place. And, with pulling our guys out of Afghanistan, and then there's so many other places in the world right now that are unsafe. Our military stretched mighty, mighty thin. And, the deployment schedule has gotten to where these guys aren't getting enough decompression time. There's a lot of problems that are creeping up, and they're only going to get worse as time goes on. And, suicide in the military community is at an all-time high right now. It's over 22 a day.
No kidding. Wow.
And it's something that needs to be addressed. And it's another epidemic, really. It's something that needs to be addressed. They're trying their best because they have all these programs that are out there. The president just in the VA came out with a new program just a couple of weeks ago. But it's something that it's really, for those of us who served, we get it, we can see it, and it's a symptom of our guys being at war for far too long. And, and unfortunately, like I said, we're winding down these wars, and there's others right on the horizon. We talked about what's going on in Africa. Now there's talk about possible conflict with China and Russia again. It's never ending. And, our politicians need to do a better job of keeping us out of wars because our military's been in war far too long. And it's something I feel really strongly about because the guys and girls are doing a great job. I'm not saying that, but, you can only do it for so long before it starts to affect.
So, Steve, I have a question kind of following up along those lines. Because there are so many military and they've been stretched so far and for so long, would you say healthcare for veterans is where it should be, where it needs to be? We need more funding. We need to take care of them better. What would you say is the state of veterans and their healthcare after?
It's getting much better than it was. I don't think it's where it should be yet. But they're getting much, much better. When I first got out, the VA was like nobody wanted to go. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you that, I paid out of pocket for years for stuff that the military would have treated me for at the VA hospital. That's how bad the care and the situation was at the VA hospitals. Things have really turned around. They're doing a much, much better job of treating the veterans now. Is it where it should be? I don't think so. I think, you can always get better.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that, the wait times for appointments are much better now. I think the quality of care is much, much better. And they're much more aware of what's going on, and they're definitely trying to help our veterans out. Like I said, they can always get better, and certain VA hospitals are still lagging way behind. But there's a lot of them that are doing a great job now. And the couple that I was, when I was living in Massachusetts, that I was going to, the VA hospital in Bedford and Jamaica Plain in Boston were fantastic to me. So I have no complaints.
And another question leading with veterans, we hear of a lot of homeless veterans.
That's a big problem too.
Yeah, what are we doing, or what could we be doing better to alleviate more of that?
That's one area where I don't think we're doing anything. I really don't. I mean, it's one of those things that, those guys are kind of forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that really needs to be brought to the forefront. People that fought and were wounded, combat wounded for this country, should never have to ever be homeless and living on the streets. That's something we really need to address. But that's an area I think we're lagging way, way behind.
Yeah, I saw a lot of homeless people, Steve, out in L.A. when I was there earlier in the year, and let me tell you, they're everywhere. They really are, and I wouldn't be surprised if the veterans occupied a large part of it. The one thing that I've noticed, especially since the current president, Donald Trump's been in office, is he's been at like a stare down with North Korea. Boy, you just cannot take North Korea lightly. Do you think, what are your thoughts about the North Korea situation?
Yeah, so that's another one of those situations that could blow up in a second, because that the North Korean leader, I mean, he has no one that can talk to him and tell him, hey, you know what, you're doing something wrong. He's the absolute ruler, and the rest of the country is completely under his sway. I mean, he has no advisors that can, talk to him on a one-to-one basis. And when you have a ruler that rules absolutely, that's the kind of situation that can blow up at any moment. Now, that being said, I think he likes to play upon the fact that he's kind of a wild card, and it gets, the reaction he's looking for. But I don't discount anything happening in the Korean Peninsula. But we've seen it already happen once in our lifetime. Well, not in my lifetime, but it was before mine. But
are you referring to the Korean War?
In the last 60 years,
right?
Or 70 years, I guess. But it's one of those things that I don't think we're going to have conflict with North Korea.
Right.
But I don't discount the fact that it could happen either.
Right.
It's one of those weird situations. I think the South Koreans now have a much better relationship with their counterparts in the North. And I think that will kind of rule the day, because the Koreans know what it's like to go through that. The country was devastated back, in the 50s.
Yeah,
the war there, and they don't want to live that again, especially with the threat of nuclear weapons, on the doorstep.
Yeah, you're referring to the Korean War. Ironically, Hollywood got their teeth on it when they had MASH out there. I actually used to watch that show. So let me go back to the Vietnam War one more time before we wrap up the broadcast, all right? Do you feel that the Vietnamese veterans have been on the short end of a lot of things? Because I've heard from a lot of veterans that they've gotten, they're the Rodney Dangerfield of wars, where they don't get any respect for the sacrifices that they made pertaining to health care, homelessness, etc.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, for a long time, Vietnam vets were, they were shunned. It was a very unpopular war with the people back home in the States. And, a lot of the soldiers didn't want to be there any more than the people wanted them there. But when they came home, they came home in ones and twos. It wasn't like, today we see, this whole unit's coming home and they'll have a parade and the guys all get off the plane. Back then it was, guys flying home into San Francisco and they get off the plane in ones and twos and people were spitting on them. And, one of my good friends was a paratrooper in Vietnam with the 101st Airborne, and he was telling me they told him that when he landed in the States not to wear his uniform going home because he'd be accosted. And, that was pretty. He did 3 tours in Vietnam, and he was pretty bitter about that.
I can imagine. Well, we all know full well that Muhammad Ali didn't want to go through his gold medal into I believe it was the Ohio River, and but thankfully his legacy as a boxer, he was a bit more respected. But yeah, he resisted that war as well. So, this has been, I got to tell you, Steve, an incredible broadcast. I think we've covered a lot of things. And I really enjoy hearing your stories. They go deeper than the offline things that we talked about. So, but this has really, really been a lot of fun talking to you about something that I think needs to be addressed a lot more. And with your incredible insight and experience writing a book and being able to do a podcast, I think you definitely, in my opinion, are what people should role model themselves and be able to understand history at its best. And I think we've tried as hard as we could to do that. And, again, this has been an enjoyable broadcast with you, Steve, as they all are. Anything?
Well, thank you. And, I'm as a journalist, I'm more comfortable talking about other people, like when we talk about football and stuff like that. I get kind of tongue-tied when I'm talking about myself. I'm much more comfortable, as I put it, behind the camera than in front of it. But, no, it was fun. I enjoyed this. I mean, this, like I said, usually I'm talking with somebody else, and we're talking about their exploits. And so it's a little different being on the other side of the coin tonight. And but thank you for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Well, we definitely enjoy bringing you on. I'm certainly not afraid or shy to ask questions, as if most people in the 40 years that have had to tolerate me in this industry have. Even though I will go ahead and say, Frank Reynolds, let's get this straight so we can report this thing accurately. I'll bet when you go to bed tonight that you'll be thinking, when are we going back to Arlington so I can see Frank Reynolds' gravesite? So
I know, there you go. That's going to be on the agenda.
Yeah, well, I have a lot of things to catch up on my agenda that you've already done, but the one thing you are going to do right now, Steve, is let everybody know how they can get a hold of you.
All right. Well, you can find me on Twitter at Steve 7SFG. That's my old unit, 7 Special Forces Group. I write for PatsFans.com, in the football realm. I write for SoftRep.com, with the military stuff and current affairs, what's going on in the world. I do a podcast for SoftRep Radio. I do 2 podcasts for football, Patriots 4th and 2 for Pats fans, and I also do another one called One Patriot Place. And occasionally you have me on your own show, so some folks can catch me here talking as well.
Well, we're going to change it occasionally to more often, providing you want to do it. How does that sound?
Oh, that sounds great. Anytime, my friend, anytime.
All right, well, let me tell everybody know that they are listening to No Limits WSAN Network and the South Florida Tribune as well. To follow us, you can follow us at Tribune South. As Steve and I follow each other, of course. That's how we met, was actually on Twitter. Good stuff. Facebook, South Florida Tribune. Like our page, you'll get updates. Instagram, South Florida Tribune. Follow us there. YouTube channel, South Florida Tribune. And you and I are due for a YouTube thing, Steve, when I get out to your southwestern Florida in the not-so-distant future. We're going to do one of those.
Oh, yeah.
You could definitely, our website, www.southfloridatribune.com. You can email us at southfloridatribune@gmail.com. And on LinkedIn, my name is Scott Morgenroth. And you are, as I said before, you can also find these podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts. All you have to do is hit the subscribe button, and then you'll be able to get every show that we have out there with the ones that we have on there. But meanwhile, Steve, it's been a tremendous amount of fun having you on tonight, talking about the military, and every time we get an opportunity to do it, we'll certainly go out there and do it. But tonight was a great opportunity to really get some incredible insights with a subject that doesn't, I don't think, get enough attention. So on behalf of Steve Balestrieri and Candy Ebley, my name is Scott Morgenroth, the Motor City Madmouth, wishing you a good evening, and we look forward to having Steve again. Once again, this broadcast will also be played on the South Florida Tribune podcast. Good night, everybody.